Welcome to Soul of Travel, Women's Wisdom and Mindful Travel. I'm your host, Christine Weinbrenner-Eyrich. Each week, you'll hear me having soulful conversations with women who are tourism professionals, trailblazers, and community leaders around the world. They share their personal and professional journeys to inspire you, and their stories teach you how to become a more conscious traveler, live life aligned with your values, and create a positive impact. We are thought leaders, action takers, and heart-centered change makers, and this is the Soul of Travel. Laura Fernandez has played a pivotal role in the audio industry at SiriusXM Media, a media group renowned for providing advertisers with unparalleled access to a dynamic portfolio of audio content. This includes live and exclusive content on SiriusXM, immersive streaming experiences on Pandora and SoundCloud, and a vast array of podcast networks featuring celebrated creators and hosts. As the VP Head of Industry for Travel, Laura excels in developing media solutions that connect travel brands with their target audiences through these platforms. She expertly aligns SiriusXM's offerings with the needs of travelers, ensuring effective brand engagement. Laura started her journey with SiriusXM Media in 2011 as a sales executive and was initially tasked with launching the Las Vegas market's advertising sales. Her career swiftly expanded as she built and led new verticals for casinos, tourism, and travel from scratch, harnessing the company's resources to fuel her entrepreneurial vision. Her deep passion for both music and travel brings an emotional depth to her work, emphasizing the transformative power of audio. Laura also serves on the boards of the National Alliance for Mental Illness and the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. She lives in Las Vegas with her husband, 2 dogs, and 2 horses, and spends her free time competing in show jumping or enjoying trail rides in the desert. In our conversation, Laura and I talk about our shared loves for podcasting, wellness, and horses, and specifically, Laura shares why audio is so powerful and such an important part of our lives and reaches an audience that transcends generational bounds. She shares her health journey and how we can create habits to maintain our health and wellness as we travel for business and for leisure. She also shares about an organization she loves, Women Leading Travel and Hospitality. We somehow find ourselves talking a lot about one of our favorite podcasts, Smartless, and traveling with Jason Bateman and Will Arnett. You'll just have to stay tuned to find out what that's all about. I always ask my guests 3 words they'd use to describe themselves, and Laura chose equestrian, ambitious, and passionate. Join me now for my soulful conversation with Laura Fernandez. Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I am your host, Christine, and I'm so excited to be kicking off our new year here with this conversation. You'll be hearing it a little bit later on, but today Laura is joining me here on January 3rd. So this is a really fun way to start. Laura Fernandez is joining me, and to start, I'm just going to welcome you and let you introduce yourself to our listeners.
Perfect. Well, Happy New Year, Christine. 2025. It feels pretty good. Feels good. So my name is Laura Fernandez, and I live in Las Vegas and work remotely for SiriusXM Media. I am their VP, Head of Industry for Travel, and I work on the advertising sales perspective. So SiriusXM Media is the combined advertising sales org for the big audio brands that you may know and love, like SiriusXM, Pandora. We also produce over 300 plus original podcasts like Conan Needs a Friend. We also have exclusive US-based ad partnerships with SoundCloud, NBC Universal. And we actually, speaking on the podcast side, we had recently About a year ago, did a deal with the podcast Smartless. And we also just did a deal with Unwell Network with Call Her Daddy. So I love podcasts. I love audio. I've always been in audio my entire career. So music, podcasts, that is my jam all day long.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you. And it's kind of funny because when we first connected, I actually reached out to you with like a wellness hat on and then realized what you do because you were just moderating this
Yep.
panel and I loved your energy and I was like, oh, I am putting her on my podcast wish list. And then when we actually connected, I was like, oh, there's this whole other aspect to what our conversation will be able to include. So I'm really excited about that because obviously I love podcasting as well and audio.
Yeah, and I do remember that, like, I've always been into wellness and wellness travel specifically, but yes, so I do so many travel focused panels or whether I'm moderator or on the panel, and I think sometimes people forget, "Oh, she works for a massive audio entertainment company," but which is amazing because I'm passionate about audio, so music and podcasts, but I'm also very passionate about travel. So to be able to combine the two is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think so too. And I love seeing that for my guests when you see how these different parts of their journey start to combine. And then all of a sudden they're like, they are the best versions of themselves. So then you all of a sudden see them everywhere and you're like, oh, they hit that spot where they are whole and showing up in that way, which is something we definitely talk about
A
here
lot of
on the
LinkedIn,
podcast.
a lot of LinkedIn.
Yes, I live on LinkedIn. I think I in my notes I have it ready to mention a dozen times. So someday LinkedIn needs to be sponsoring my podcast. I think
Yes,
it is powered by LinkedIn.
manifest it.
I am manifesting. I'm doing a manifesting as everyone probably is this time of year, like a manifesting exercise. But well, before we get going and talking about, all the things in your life today, I'd love to understand you as a traveler in your early travels. So, would you mind sharing a little bit about kind of how travel initially shaped itself in your life and how you began to develop that relationship with travel?
For me for me growing up, we didn't have the funds, to be taking these, like, whether it was going to even just Disney World or these elaborate trips. I always felt like my friends were going on summer vacations or winter vacations. We just didn't have the funds to do that, but the way that I traveled was actually through, uh, charity organizations, and my family got me involved with Habitat for Humanity very early on. I was also very heavily involved with my church youth group, and we would go on these trips every single summer. Now, going back to you still had to pay for this trip. But I remember doing car washes and bake sales just to get the money. And I mean, I will tell you, Christine, I started working at 12 years old just to be able to have funds to do these massive charity trips. And that was my first real experience with travel. I mean, we would get in a van or a big bus. And grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So about 45 minutes north of Philly, an hour south New York City. So we would get in these big buses and we would go to like South Dakota. We would go to Savannah, Georgia. We would go to Portland, Maine. And we would spend about 2 weeks, whether building houses or building community centers. And that was travel for me, is to completely immerse myself in the local community, but then also give back. I think that was such a rewarding piece of my how I grew up because I loved to travel. I loved getting on the bus. I loved stopping at rest stops. I loved exploring all these like small destinations, but immersing myself in the community and getting to know the people in that community truly was so impactful. And then just the work alone, if you've ever experienced being a part of Habitat for Humanity, it's such an incredible organization. And to actually build something and then go back home and you felt so accomplished. So it's interesting because I didn't do a whole lot of, I would say, leisure or if any leisure travel growing up. And even today, I mean, my majority of my travel is business focused. So I've always traveled with whether it's a work ethic in mind, I think that's just who I am, but I've always had that work ethic mentality with travel.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting too to talk about it because I do think that some people maybe sounds kind of weird, but miss that they're traveling because it's a part of going somewhere to do something, if it's work or, meetings or even traveling to meet family. Like we sometimes disconnect those experiences from the idea of traveling. And even as you were saying that, I was thinking similarly in my life, like that's what my early travels or non-travels looked like. And summer camp was my big thing. And I remember how hard I had to work to be able to go. And my goal was always to go for 3 weeks. And so my parents are like, we've got 1 week, but if you want to go more than that, you have to earn your way. And so, same, I started working young and then I would work. Usually I could earn enough to pay for my second week. And then my third week while I was there, I had to wash dishes. And that's how I got to be there.
Oh, yeah.
Which actually was so fun because someone who ended up being like a great friend all through that experience. And then into high school and college, like we were always the dishwasher kids.
Yeah.
And I learned so much through that. But just as you were talking, I was like, wow, that really was a powerful travel experience. And it also, I think, probably formed the idea of community for me because that's a huge part of travel for me. And then also just connection and being immersed in nature. And like it was so much about the experience over where I was. It was about like what was happening. And I think even today, as long as I find community and connection, it doesn't matter as much where I am because that's what's important to me when I'm traveling. So I think it's always fun to kind of go back and look at those early experiences because I think they do really inform what we're doing when we travel today.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And you brought up a good point about the outdoor and the nature. And those were the best memories. Like I go back to traveling to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or Savannah, Georgia. I mean, it's the landscape. And for me with travel, as long as I love to get outside. I love being outside. I want to be one with nature. I am my other passion is horses, and I love horses, and I have three, and I want to ride, and I want to be outside. And so for me for travel, it's like I just growing up, I needed to get outside, and I needed to do things outside, and to be able to be a part of those communities and build and do cool things like that, I needed it.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned horses and I'm sure they'll come up again, but that's
They
also
always
something
come up
that
with me.
yeah. That finds its way into my travel too, like in just interesting ways. And I think I grew up in Montana, and my grandparents had a huge cattle ranch, so horses were a huge part of my upbringing. I loved riding. I don't do it now as often, but when I was young, it was huge. And I remember my like awkward middle school years, and my horses were like my besties. And I would go out there and be like, combing them and petting them and grooming them and chatting with them. And I felt so at ease. And I'll notice when I travel, I don't know how I find horses, but every once in a while, you're just like, oh, there's a horse and we're connecting, and I'm finding that same like calmness, and it helps to transition or ease like discomforts of travel because it's such a grounding touch point. Or even I remember one time I was in Dubai, and we went to visit this sheikh who had these beautiful Arabian horses,
Oh,
and he's like, oh, everyone's afraid of my horses because they're so huge. And then here's me over like forehead to forehead with this
oh yes.
horse.
Oh
And
yeah.
I was like, oh, I'll be back in a minute. I just have to commune with this horse.
I'll tell you, it's funny that they said Arabians, I feel like are such a small breed. And so probably they're like, oh my gosh. Yeah, I am warm bloods and they are beast. They are, and I am 5'2" and getting on my warm bloods. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I sometimes some of my trips right now are all actually around horse competitions. And that's my leisure travel, is going to a horse competition. I do the show jumping and everything. I'm not the one that's hauling my horses, my trainer is, but we haul the horses out, go compete, and stay at an Airbnb. And that is my leisure trip for the year, is going to a horse competition.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to get into talking about podcasting and audio. As you mentioned, you also have a podcast talking about horses, equestrian podcast.
I tell you, it always comes back to the horses with me.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and it's also making me laugh. No one, if you're not watching, if you're listening, you have a picture of a cow behind you, and I'm like, oh, I feel like maybe it should be a horse, but
It
there's
should be
probably a
this,
story
but
there.
I know. I got it at West Elm and I like never switched it out.
Well, that will be a 2025 mission, maybe. But so I love podcasting so much. And what I wanted to do, we kind of hit on this when we were preparing for this conversation, is to dig a little deeper into the value and the power of podcasting from both a consumer standpoint and, building travel brand relationships and advertising relationships. Because one of the things I mentioned to you is, because this is a newer medium, I guess, sometimes it's hard to convey the unique space that this is. And it's such a deeply personal and like intimate experience, even though it's this one-sided experience for the listener and, the people having that conversation or hosting the podcast. And I would have to say, like, I'm not really a crime podcast person. I know there's a lot of people that's what they think of when it comes to podcasts. I'm definitely a conversations person. And like, some of my favorite podcasts are Pulling the Thread by Elise Lunan. You mentioned Smartless. Oh my gosh. That's my road trip podcast. Jason Bateman and Sean Hayes and Will Arnett. I'm just like, okay, girls, put your headphones on. Mom's listening to Smartless.
Beth.
And there's a few other that I just really love, as well as business podcasts and spiritual podcasts. And what I love most is that I feel like I'm sitting across the sofa from these people and like I'm invited into this conversation. I'm learning, but again, I'm appreciating this connection and this trust that seems to be built between me and the host. Again, even though I'm not really there, I feel like I'm a part of this journey and this story, and that I'm important in the equation. And I think that is what I love so much, particularly about podcasts. Even Audible, like, there's something about hearing the story, like it feels like it's yours when it's told to you that way. So I want to talk a little bit about this, and why do you think it's so unique, or what do you see is the real power of podcasting?
To your earlier comment of podcasting being a new medium, it was actually one of the first mediums. I mean, you go back way in time where there'd be families sitting around the fireplace and they would have the radio playing. Audio is truly like print audio, the start of media. And podcasting has definitely had this massive growth over the past couple of years. But I think that with podcasting, why I am so drawn to it, not only from a great way for brands to get their message heard, but also just from a medium, because it doesn't interrupt your daily life. You can, as you said, you get in a car with your family, you listen to Smartless, like you're driving, like you're working out, you're cooking, you're cleaning. It never interrupts your daily life. When you think about social media, you're sitting on your couch, you're watching TV, like you're scrolling, like it is a part, it doesn't like feel as seamless as audio does. And I always like audio as like such a great complement to visual media, because you're never going to be watching TV and listening to smart lists at the same time. And for me, podcast, like I've always been in audio. Like I've sold advertising on our music platforms, and amazing ways. Still the top form of audio is music. And but with podcasting, you have that influencer piece. And the host is an influencer. Same as you look at TikTok or Instagram, the podcast host is the same kind of built-in audience. But it's so amazing because you can have them do these awesome host-read ads where they're talking about your brand. And for me, the reason I started my own podcast, I was going to do a travel themed one, but I felt like, you know what, I'm going to go the route of, trust me, audio, music, everything, travel are such passion points of mine. But I wanted to do something around horses, because horses are such a niche, like very niche audience. And all these horse equestrian podcasts were doing these like interviews with these big name riders, but there was nothing out there that found the humor in the equestrian world. So it's me and my two girlfriends. It's called the Three Stride Podcast, and we just riff and we talk about the equestrian world. But again, I wanted to understand, because I work on the advertising sales perspective. So I wanted to understand from start to finish on how like podcasts work. So now when I talk to brands, I understand what the whole process is. And then I also do understand the value for brands to advertise in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love how you were sharing about that. And then the idea of the influencer piece. This is something that I recently, like someone said, "Oh, you're a travel influencer." And I was like, "Oh no, I'm not." And then it came up again and I was like, "Wait, why do people keep telling me this?" And then I started thinking, I was like, "Oh, well, yeah, I want to be an influencer
Yeah.
because I'm speaking about travel in a way that I think can heal the world. I want to influence as many people as possible to take part in these conversations or think about travel in a different way." And then when I started thinking about it from that perspective, I was like, okay, how do I shift gears and think about what that means if that's how I want to show up? And I think that was a first big shift for me. Like, I don't know that people were maybe thinking of it like that. And I don't know if you have heard that from any other podcasters, but you know, it is what we're doing, whether it's what we set out to do or not.
Yeah. Yes, I do. Podcast hosts know that they are influencers, because influencers are merely people and celebrities that are big voices that influence other people. And podcast hosts, they know this. And one thing, Conan O'Brien, I think, one of the best comedians of all time, he loves the podcast format, because when he was doing the late night show, the late night show, he would have like not even 5 minutes with these guests. With podcasting, you have this long form content opportunity where he now gets an hour and a half with the guests. And so you can have these longer, more in-depth conversations. And while we live in this world where people's attention spans are so short, I will tell you, they can listen to a whole podcast because you go back to what they're doing when they're listening to podcasts. I mean, there's no better road trip when you have SmartList playing in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, Smartless guys, that's enough mentions now. Like, I want to talk to you. That's funny. So yeah, I think that's really, it's really great to create that understanding and kind of talk about the power. And then, like you said, the trust is really important too. And I think that's where the influencer piece is so powerful. And like that, the long form connection, like you also said, the hour long conversations, which I know when I started my podcast, and I think I first started with doing like 40 to 50-minute episodes. And then pretty quickly I was like, no, we're just going to take a whole hour. And it's okay if someone maybe has to come back and listen to the other half later.
Yes.
But I want the depth of conversation that comes from that
Agreed.
space. And then if you flip that, then that is also building that connection with my audience even more. And they can learn from me, they can learn from my guests, which is what I want them to be able to do. And so then you look at the advertiser, then they're connecting with someone who's already put in all of this groundwork. And so I think it's brilliant. I don't understand it nearly as well as you do, but I just love kind of consuming podcasts and seeing my own behavior and then trying to translate that into it from this side of the microphone.
Agreed.
And you also mentioned, that one of the things that's unique about it is that the audio reaches us everywhere. And I think also it's interesting being in the travel industry is that podcasts are such a part of many people's travel experiences, whether it's road trips or airplanes. Do you think that the connection between travel and audio is unique, or what do you think that offers when you bring those two pieces together?
We did our own research study. So we have our own panel based study, and we asked our audience of when is audio part of the whole travel journey. And it's from start to finish. It's from planning a trip to booking a trip to actually going to the destination, whether it's just having your earbuds in, you're listening to music, or you're listening to podcasts or an audiobook. It's a part of the whole journey. You even think about when you're recapping the trip. I mean, you're not going to post a reel on Instagram without having a killer music bed. And it truly is a part from start to finish in all the travel moments. But definitely, I mean, you just as a consumer can go through the airport and take an inventory of how many people have their earbuds in or their headphones on. I mean, you go and just look through the plane when you're walking up and maybe walk from the front of the plane to the back of the plane. I would bet that around 80 to 90% of people have earbuds in or their headphones on. And it truly is a part of the whole travel journey. I mean, but that's audio. People are spending, I think, 4 hours plus a day with audio. So you add that to the whole travel experience. People are going to be consuming it not just only on the plane or in the car, but also making those travel decisions. They're going to be listening to it, whether it's on their desktop computer or their Amazon Alexa. Like, it's a part of the whole travel journey.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting too is who is listening to audio, because it's everyone. It's not, there's
Transcends across all generations, all ethnicities. Audio is a part of everyone's daily life.
Yeah, I even think like my 9-year-old, or my daughter that was just in here as we were trying to get the conversation started. I was like, go put some music on with your headphones. Like that's, such a part of our reality. So I think it's so beautiful, like you said, how seamless it is with our lives. As I was researching you, I always love to spend time on LinkedIn. Here's our first shout out for LinkedIn. We're moving from SmartList to LinkedIn now. And I saw your post that you shared of Christia Watkins Melendez, and she is working on the multicultural traveler series. And I thought that was so interesting because she was saying that on her LinkedIn post that Latinos use travel as a means to connect with their heritage, and that the audio they consume every day enhances their desire for that cultural connection. And I just thought that was such an interesting way, again, to think about this unique platform and what it can do for us. So I'm wondering if you can share about the importance of audio in fostering those types of connections.
Yeah, that's we have an incredible multicultural team at SiriusXM Media entitled Fluency that really helps brands bridge the gap to connect with multicultural audiences. And if we look at a platform medium that transcends across, again, what I said, generations and ethnicities, it's it's music and audio. And just to feel closer to their culture, music plays a big piece into that.
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting, and when you were sharing that, it reminded me of a time when I was in Bali, and I had this, great driver I was working with for a few days while I was researching trips for my company, Lotus Sojourns, and we got in the car and he was like, music, right? I was like, well, of course.
Yeah.
And he put on like Pearl Jam and then all this 90s music. And he was probably maybe like 10 years younger than me. And, here I am on the other side of the world. And we're both just like talking about how much we love Pearl Jam and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, I love how this happens everywhere because I've traveled to other places and this connection of music, especially. I mean, we're fortunate that, people are listening to English speaking and American music everywhere around the world. And that's how many people even learn the English language. And so I feel like it really bridges
Oh,
those gaps when you're traveling.
yes, it brings communities together. I mean, you go look at all these amazing destinations, even just in the United States, that music is at the center. And I mean, you go to like the state of Texas, the music is so different from Dallas to Austin to Houston. But it is the ultimate connector.
Hey, listeners, it's Christine. And I hope you know by now that when I jump in to quickly share during our sacred time for conversation, it's because I'm really excited to share about an aligned brand or offer. These are companies or organizations that speak to me, and I know they will speak to you too. This share is no exception. I am happy to talk to you about our January partnership with ExplorerX. However, this relationship extends way beyond this month. In fact, ExplorerX founder Michael Bennett and I have been meeting for our own soulful conversations nearly every month for the past 4 years. I learned about ExplorerX when I took the Transformational Travel Council's travel design course in 2020. And I pretty much geeked out when I read Michael's doctoral thesis. Honestly, as silly as it might sound, I may have cried. And this was because it was one of the first times I remember thinking that this was a place where people think about the potential of travel like I do. And I only share this backstory because this connection is important to understanding why I want to share their work with you. Since then, we have brainstormed, theorized, book clubbed, strategized, and cheered each other on in our businesses. I have long loved the work that Michael and his team do and have spent time listening to their podcast and connecting with one of his designers, Robin. All the while observing their passion and learning about their unique approach to travel, understanding how they strive to not only design trips, but to design journeys. Journeys that allow their travelers deep and meaningful connections to destinations, as well as with their travel companions and themselves. Then, last year, ExplorerX became one of my clients, and I had the opportunity to meet with several ExplorerX travelers, and I created podcast-style materials for them to share to tell their story of their business in long and short-form content. And with this much backstory, it was a real honor to talk to their travelers and hear it straight from the people who know best what a journey with ExplorerX really means. I loved it so much. These travelers are the greatest people who jumped in, open-hearted, and ready for adventure. They may or may not have been seeking personal growth and new awareness, but when it landed at their feet, in the shape of ExplorerX's Mindful Travel Toolkit, they picked it up and engaged, and they agreed they were the better for it. Whether they knew where they wanted to travel, what they wanted to experience, or chose to dive into the literal unknown by selecting a destination unknown experience, I loved hearing how each guest got what they were hoping for and so much more. This is really what sets ExplorerX apart. This high level of attention to detail and care, combined with their destination connections that allow for unexpected experiences, make their journeys truly life-changing. I cannot speak highly enough about the heart and passion that I know they put into crafting unique journeys for clients who are looking for once-in-a-lifetime experiences. If you want to hear more about Explorer X, or want to hear Michael and I wax poetic about the transformational power of travel, you can listen to episode 25 of the podcast. You can learn more about traveling with Explorer X at www.explorer-x.com. Make sure you tell Michael and his team I sent you. Now, let's head back over to our soulful conversation. Well, we have talked about our deep love of audio and podcasting, and I'm sure that we could go on and on, but I want to shift gears. And as I mentioned, when we first met, you were on a panel on wellness travel. I think it's something we both think is really important. And I want to talk about wellness and travel, but maybe not from the perspective that people might think, not necessarily in terms of like retreats or wellness with resorts and spas, but really about what it takes to be in travel and be well. Because I think this is something that is a real struggle for people. For example, for me, I might be up at 5 a.m. to catch a webinar in Indonesia and then, trying to grab a call at 11 p.m. to be on someone else's time zone. And I know that you travel a lot for your work. And it takes a lot to create that balance. And I know that you also have a real commitment to wellness and work with the National Alliance for Mental Illness and Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. So I wanted to talk to you about why prioritizing health and wellness on the road is important and about how you actually do this, because I think it can be super overwhelming with packed schedules to places that look different every time you get there. And routine is a huge part of health and wellness. So we're going to just jump in here.
Okay. Health is my number one priority in life, my health. And then everything backs into that, and how I live my life is to ensure that I am healthy. At 20 years old, so over 22 years ago, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and very severe Crohn's. And I was in the hospital. Dropped a tremendous amount of weight, and I was in college at this time. I was working, I mentioned earlier on, but I've always been working. So I was working my way through college, and I got sick and got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And the doctor, and this is like 2003, so autoimmune conditions weren't as prevalent. I got diagnosed, and the doctor that diagnosed me gave me a list of foods. It was alcohol, spicy food, red meat, and he just gave me dairy, gave me this long list of foods. He goes, I would recommend avoiding all of these foods. And he goes, it all goes back to your gut health. Not to be like TMI, but like you want to have a healthy gut life, gut balance. And so when I got sick, I was in college, I was working my way through school. I didn't have any other choice but to cut out all those foods and give myself a fighting chance. So I cut out the dairy, the fried food, the greasy food. And can you imagine being 21 years old? And I was in Morgantown, West Virginia at WVU. But I made that choice because for me, I needed to work. I needed to support myself and needed to get through college. I wanted to have an incredible career. I didn't want to let the Crohn's disease hold me back. I get into my career doing advertising sales, and I build up the vertical now that I oversee, travel. And you can't run a travel vertical without traveling. And definitely my first couple business trips, I was almost flying by the seat of my pants a little bit. And while I wasn't eating poorly, I was eating out a lot. I was just not as mindful of what I was actually consuming. And I got really sick, got put into the hospital. And I was like, okay, you know what? I need to focus on my health. I need to focus on my wellness because this is my career. I travel for my career. I love to travel. I really do. I love business travel. I have such a good flow state when I get into it, but I need to maintain my health. My top priorities when I'm traveling is my sleep, to ensure I sleep well, because I do. I love my sleep, and that I continue with my diet. And I have made one thing that I am. So I travel a lot to the East Coast, and I live almost a permanent East Coast time zone because I wake up every day at 4 a.m. and I go to bed at 8 p.m. So it actually makes my life really easy when I'm traveling from West Coast to East Coast, because I'm sleeping till like 7 a.m. instead of like some people wake up at 6 and they'll be waking up at 9. I am really good at almost keeping a very similar sleep schedule, no matter what coast I am. Now, granted, if I have a trip to Europe, makes it a little bit trickier. My husband says I'm going a little next level by waking up earlier and earlier on the West Coast. But maintaining my sleep cycle is really important. And I do things in the hotel room, like I bring my own pillowcase. I have a sound machine. I have this incredible, I used to carry this really big sound machine, like a dome. I think it's called the Dome, but I found this little mini one. So now I can have an extra pair of shoes when I pack. But it's a tiny little mini sound machine. I do that. I also, with my diet, I get to a destination. I know where the grocery stores are. I know where, I love Whole Foods. And I load up in things that I would eat at home. I really don't alter my diet when I'm on the road. And if it means calling the restaurant ahead of schedule just to let them know I don't do dairy, I don't do fried food, greasy food. Restaurants are so accommodating. I also do a lot of sushi. I love sushi so much, and I know that sits well with my stomach. And I really am also, I'm not a big drinker by any means, but that's one thing of the client entertaining. I have been known, this is a secret, I fake drink all the time. I get some soda water. I tell the waiter ahead of schedule, like, hey, I'm going to order a Tito's and soda, but I'm just going to drink soda water. These are very basic things, but again, going back to my top priorities when I'm traveling for business, it's keep up my sleep and keep up my diet.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that and for sharing those tips. And I think, as you were mentioning, as it being eating and drinking being a part of your job, staying up late being a part of your job, like these are things, especially at conferences and events, but even like you said, working just with clients, I think you don't realize how much that's a part of those experiences until you are trying to remove those from your travel, your business travel. And I think it's even harder. A lot of times people with travel have this mindset that because travel is usually for a short period of time, it's like we can just like let go of all of those rules for ourselves, right? Like we can order dessert at every meal, or we can stay up late, or you can have poolside margaritas or whatever, because it's only going to be for a week. And then when your travel shifts and it becomes your work and your normal routine, I definitely see colleagues that I feel like they just pull that with them and they're like doing that 24/7, 365 for 10 years. I'm like, I would be dead now, literally, figuratively. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't do that. And so I really appreciated having this conversation with you when I did. Over the last year, I have had a lot of issues with migraines and vertigo, and it has really impacted how I can travel, how I feel comfortable traveling, because those two things make travel really uncomfortable. And this year, at the end of the year, I had a series of conferences back to back to back. And normally I would try to, do a carry-on, all these things. And I was I had direct flights to every place I was going. And I was like, you know what? I'm checking a big bag and I'm throwing in, I went to an event in San Diego. I threw in my yoga mat and an acupressure mat, and I used them every day. And it made such a huge difference. And I knew like that was the beginning of setting myself up for the circuit of events I had to attend, and then brought like my tea and my favorite teacup and these things that normally probably people wouldn't be packing. And then I told myself, I'm like, we're doing early bedtimes and it's fine. And I have also been a super fake drinker.
Yeah.
And healthy snacks in my bag, like at the events. And I think I love having this conversation to normalize this and to make people realize that it's okay to set those boundaries when we travel, because especially when there's all these late night events and then people going out after the late night events, like it can feel like a lot of pressure to participate, that to not lose out on a connection. And I think we really need to be more conscious of the reality of people needing to be well while they're on the road.
I don't get me wrong. Like I definitely modify some of my daily wellness. Obviously, I'm not riding my horses, and or I don't have the bandwidth most of the time when I'm traveling. Like I love going to Pilates classes. I don't have the bandwidth to do that. I run almost every day. Don't have the bandwidth to do that typically when I'm traveling. So I do make some modifications, but for me, it's like if I can still maintain the diet. And yes, there are some later nights, but I have no problem wrapping things up early and like leaving the conference a little bit sooner than most people. But I also, so much of my work ethic is I will have an amazing dinner with our partners and everything, but I never feel the need to be like, okay, I got to stay out till like 3 a.m. with our partners just because we already had like a nice, meaningful conversation. But I think it's, I, I maybe I do find while being diagnosed with Crohn's disease was not ideal, especially getting diagnosed so young. I think it really did help me um, with my whole health and wellness journey because in my mind, I never had the choice to do anything but this. And I need to maintain my health because I would not be as able to accomplish all the things have been able to accomplish in my career if I wasn't healthy. And don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, there's been some trips though. I would tell you the plane rides that were brutal. I was having a flare up, but it it does not define me, and I'm able to get through it. But I'm also, again, very mindful of what I'm eating and I'm drinking, and I make sure I'm sleeping too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's so important. And I just aired an episode in my new subscription product that I'm offering called Soul Travel Beyond. That's just been announced, but I did an episode on success. And one of the things was, how our well-being impacts what we're able to do. And that we often only talk about well-being in the context of like burnout or like the end point and what you've done wrong at that point, and not like how to foster it all along the way in order to have a bigger impact and to do the things you really want to do. Like, don't let that be the thing that holds you back. So I just think it's so great to invite like earlier conversation. Like you said, your hand was forced, so it was never not an option. But I do think a lot of people, that's what has to happen before we realize that we need to take our health and well-being into consideration in our lives every day.
I completely agree. And so with me, I'm always like making modifications in real time. Like I noticed I wasn't sleeping as well. So then I was like, you know what? I'm going to bring my own pillowcase, like making constant pivots into like how to make things a little bit better because my travel and how I travel keeps getting better and better as like each day goes on and every trip goes on is I'm getting more and more familiar, whether it's with my surroundings or how to get something really quick. And also like technology now, like Uber Eats and Postmates, like it makes things so much easier. I actually in life, I never have done New Year's resolutions. This is like, I never do New Year's resolutions because if I need to make an adjustment or if I need to do something different, I make it in real time. And that's always been my mindset. Like there's some early on, I felt like I could not eat tomatoes. And then I started getting really sensitive to tomatoes. So you make a quick pivot. And as long as I can just keep staying healthy, I'm good to go.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit. I know that you talked about how much work travel you have, and then at some point you had this realization and kind of a mindset shift around what you wanted from your non-work or your leisure travel, and that you wanted to spend more time riding horses, be more local. And I think this is really important in the context both of well-being, understanding why you're traveling and what you want out of travel, as well as in the context of sustainability. Because I think if we travel in a way that's more nourishing, we travel less because we don't need all these experiences. And so I wanted to see if you could share a little bit about that mindset shift and how that has changed what your leisure travel looks like today and how you make those choices.
Yes. As I as I mentioned earlier, I'm on the road probably like every other week, or 3 times a month for work travel, for business travel. So when I'm not traveling for work, I do enjoy being home and I enjoy being with the horses. I enjoy going back to my normal routine. But I will tell you, I'm very fortunate because I live in one of the tourism meccas of the world, Las Vegas. And I am the queen of staycations. A lot of Las Vegas locals never go down to the strip. I go down to the strip when I'm home 2 to 3 times a week. And I love experiencing whether it's the spa at Wynn or going hiking in Red Rock. I am all about really enjoying my local community. And now I am very fortunate that I live in Las Vegas, so I get to experience so many incredible things. But it's the staycation mindset. And I think when you are traveling so much for work, it is good to have that reset where you're at your home base. And I'm fortunate, my home base is Las Vegas. So I still get a little bit of a vacation when I'm going down to Wynn for dinner or going to the Cosmopolitan. Next week is the Consumer Electronics Show. So I'll actually be on CES. I'll be on the strip all week long. But it's because so a lot of my friends that don't travel for work are going on these amazing, like 2 week long vacations or doing this, but they're not traveling for work. And they also, a lot of them don't have horses. And for me, my passion is the horses. And I mentioned earlier on the podcast, but I do travel. I do travel with my horse. And I think that's where we talk about sports tourism and the massive growth there. It's a different way to travel. There is one annual trip I always do with me and my husband. We go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and we drive out from Las Vegas to Jackson. It's a 10-hour drive, and it's one of my favorite trips that we do every single year. But when we go there, I'll tell you, we're keeping up with our same routine. The only thing is we occasionally will do a trail ride, but for the most part, I just go for runs and hikes and go to our favorite sushi restaurant. All things we do in Las Vegas, there's just a little bit more greenery there.
Yeah. And I think that's so interesting too, is just thinking about, we often feel like we have to just like go big when we travel, and we don't realize that we can just still be ourselves wherever we're going. And I think that that's even a different way of re-envisioning travel and envisioning traveling with wellness, is not trying to push every single limit, and allowing yourself to be who you are. And I would say many of us are our best selves when we travel. So there are actually parts of us that come alive, and things we do and ways of being that we aren't as successful as doing in our normal lives. But I think the converse can be true too, where we can allow ourselves to just be somewhere and
and not expect that all of a sudden now we're like the best salsa dancer and we're vegans and we're like whatever it is that we have thought we might invent about ourselves on this trip. Like that doesn't have to always be the way we travel.
I agree. And one thing I had this realization a couple years ago, because I was doing a couple different panels all around the growth of not only wellness travel, but the growth of the solo female traveler. And I had a realization. I go, I'm a solo female traveler and for business, because that's who I am. And it's like I am resilient, I'm strong, I know what to do, and I'm completely capable of traveling by myself. I never thought of myself as a solo female traveler. I just thought of myself as a business traveler. And I was like, oh my gosh, I actually had attended this conference, wonderful, and I attended that conference, and it was actually up in Maine. I think it was my first one that I had attended. And I had the Uber driver take me to a lighthouse because I wanted to see one. And I had the Uber driver take a picture of me in front of the lighthouse. And I go, I am a solo traveler. That's it.
Yeah. I love when we learn these new definitions of who we are. It's like me. I'm like, oh, I am a travel influencer and you're a solo female traveler,
Yes.
which are both super obvious. And yet we were like, oh, wow.
Oh, that's weird.
And we love Wonderful here. It comes up all the time. So thank you, Beth Santos, for such a great event. Speaking of organizations, I wanted to talk about Women Leading Travel and Hospitality. I know that is a organization that you have spoken about being instrumental in your career, and I haven't talked much about them here on the podcast. I learned about them. I was on their 2023 Game Changers, Women Entrepreneurs Disrupting Travel and Hospitality list, which when I saw that, I was like, what? That's the most amazing like series of words ever to be strung together. And they included me. So that was such an honor. But I wanted to talk about why that's important, as well as bring it to the attention of my listeners who maybe are looking for this type of community.
Yes, Women Leading Travel and Hospitality, an incredible organization. They do roundtables throughout the year where they talk about topics that are impacting the travel industry, but also leadership advice, whether it's how to lead a team better or give advice on to how to help with retention. But all this surrounds with female leaders in the travel industry. And it really is, it's an incredible organization. They have their annual summit in Atlanta coming up in 2025. Why I like this organization and honestly, organizations that SiriusXM Media partners with is because the connections that I'm able to make with our travel partners. So we have some of our major airlines, our accommodation partners, our OTAs that are all in attendance. And not only are we learning about the travel industry and what's impacting it from not only just an overarching overview, but also from a marketing perspective. But Women Leading Travel and Hospitality, I'm only a couple years into the partnership, but I love that organization. They do an incredible conference, they do incredible roundtables, and then they have virtual events all through the year.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so I know we are getting close for time, so we have to jump to our rapid fire-ish questions. We'll probably be a little more rapid. But the first question is, what are you reading right now?
Oh my gosh. Let me tell you, I just started. I know we're supposed to do rapid fire, but The God of the Woods, Liz Moore. Hey, it's actually a summer camp that takes place. It's a summer camp story, mystery. Takes place in the 70s. One of the campers goes missing.
What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
Sound machine. All day long, my sound machine.
Maybe you can share the link for the little one that you found, because I feel like that's something many of us love. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there. Where is a place that you would still love to sojourn?
I would love to go, and I've not yet been there. Big Sur.
Ooh, me too. That's
Big Sur.
been on my list for a long time.
And I'm right on the West Coast. I need to go.
Yeah. You could take the long way to Jackson Hole.
Yeah.
The really long way.
Huh?
What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place you've been?
I'm going to say sushi. I love sushi. And my husband, I go to the same restaurant in Las Vegas almost every single Friday, Other Mama. And there's another incredible sushi place in Jackson, but that truly brings me almost the comfort of home, if that is like almost the reverse. And that's why I love going for omakase when I'm traveling, is it does give me a sense of comfort. I love sushi.
Yeah, me too. Denver has a really great one. I don't know, when next time you're traveling through here, let me know and I'll make sure Sushi Den is so good.
Oh,
Let's see. Who was a person that inspired or encouraged you to set out and travel the world?
I would say my Aunt Leslie and my Uncle Walt. They are, my Aunt Leslie is my mother's sister, and then her husband, and they travel the world. They do not have children. They're like my second parents. And they go on 3 to 4 like massive trips a year. They're retired now. They just were in Iceland. I think they're doing Dublin coming up, and they really did give me an inspiration to travel.
Yeah. If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
I'm going to go with, I'm going to bring it back home. I'm going to say Will Arnett.
Oh, man, these guys. Okay. They're not letting us alone today.
I want to be with anyone that is funny. I love to laugh. I want someone that's sarcastic and funny and just can keep me laughing the whole time.
I would say 14-year-old me, as much as today me, would also love to travel with Jason Bateman because he kills me. So that's hilarious. But this is funny. I don't know what we're telling the universe, but something is happening right now.
Yep.
Okay, the last question. Who is one woman in the travel industry you admire and would love to recognize in this space?
Amy Martin Ziegenfuss. She's the CMO of Carnival Cruise Line, and she was at Hilton. And she definitely has inspired me, has helped me get connected. She's actually was the one who connected me to women leading travel and hospitality. And one of my favorite partners that I worked with, and very honest, transparent conversation. She has not ridden a horse, but way back when she used to ride horses. And so we just we met right before at the beginning of 2020. And she was actually on a panel of mine, her and Beth Santos, actually, about the solo female traveler. And we never got to air that because the worldwide pandemic happened. But that was where I first met Amy. And it was really cool to see her a year later. I can't remember what city we were in, but we had dinner. I think we were getting some sushi. But she has been such an inspiration for me. And it definitely going through the pandemic, even though I wasn't directly in the travel industry, I sure felt like it. And just all my dialogue with her.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing so much about your connection with her, and thank you for your time talking about podcasting and wellness and Smartless. Like, what else could we talk about? This was so good.
Oh my gosh, Christine, thank you so much for having me. Really, it was a fun conversation, and I'm really happy you're in the podcast space.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to Soul of Travel, presented by Journey Woman. I hope you enjoyed the journey. If you loved this conversation, I encourage you to subscribe and rate the podcast. Please share episodes that inspire you with others, because this is how we extend the impact of this show. Learn more about each of my guests by reading our episode blogs, which are more than your average show notes. I think you'll love the connection. Find our episode blogs at www.souloftravelpodcast.com. I am so proud of the way these conversations are bringing together people from around the world. If this sounds like your community, welcome. I am so happy you are here. I am all about community and would love to connect. You can find me on Facebook at Soul of Travel Podcast, or follow me on Instagram either at she.sojourns or at Soul of Travel Podcast. Stay up to date by joining the Soul of Travel Podcast mailing list. You'll also want to explore the Journey Woman community and its resources for women travelers over 50. I'd also like to share a quick thank you to my podcast producer and content magician, Carly Eduardo, CEO of Convergente. I look forward to getting to know you and hopefully hear your story.